Have you ever had a conversation with someone and you felt like they were not listening? You felt like they were not listening because the feedback they were giving was not consistent with what you were experiencing and trying to express. That can feel pretty frustrating. That's why in this conversation, we will talk about different listening style. I am Dr. Shalonda Jones. I am a communication scholar and a public speaking coach. I specialize in helping professionals learn to get over their concerns with public speaking so they can share their valuable input in the workplace with confidence. If you are new here, welcome. Thank you for joining me. Make sure you hit the subscribe button so you can get the tips and techniques I share every week to help unleash the power in your voice. If you've been with me before, welcome back. It's always a pleasure to see you. Make sure you hit the like button because, as I have said before, when you interact with this information, your brain gets the idea it is important to you. That function in your brain is called the reticular activating system, and it will help you to develop the skill of speaking with confidence. So make sure you're interacting with the content, and thank you for being here once again. In this conversation, we will talk about 4 different types of listener styles. And it's important to understand these 4 different types of listener styles because it can help maximize the effectiveness of our communication with people who have different listening styles from us. When we know our own listening style and we understand the listening style that someone else has that we're communicating with, that can enhance the effectiveness and increase the chances of feeling heard when we are sharing information. By the end of this conversation, you will have a better understanding of your own listening style and be able to identify when someone has a listening style different from yours. So let's get started. The first type of listener style is called people-oriented listening. People-oriented listening occurs when someone acquires information with the express goal of nurturing a relationship. You can tell when somebody's engaged in people-oriented listening because they will say things in response like, "Oh, that must be difficult. I'm sad to hear you are going through that." Or if somebody's excited about an experience, a person engaged in people-oriented listening will say, "Oh my goodness, that's amazing. I'm so happy for you." They will express support in the feedback they provide when engaged in people-oriented listening. Professionals who tend to use people-oriented listening the most include therapists, psychologists, social workers, teachers, counselors, and coaches. And by coaches, I mean professional development type of coaches, self-help coaches, mindset coaches, those types of coaches, maybe even athletic coaches. But the whole goal of people-oriented listening is to nurture a relationship. There are instances where anyone can exhibit people-oriented listening in specific situations. However, there are some people who have a dominant listening style associated with people-oriented listening. That means that is their preferred reason, their number one reason for acquiring information because they are committed to nurturing relationships. The second type of listener style is called action-oriented listening. This type of listener acquires information with the express goal of solving problems. They are the people who will tell you what to do about information you share with them, even when you did not ask them how to solve a problem. Action-oriented listeners are different from people-oriented listeners because people-oriented listeners are committed to building relationships and nurturing the relationships and focused on the emotions of the person. Action-oriented listeners, on the other hand, are committed to solving problems even when you may not have said you had a problem. You'll know an action-oriented listener because they'll say things like, "Well, what you should have done was," or "Did you consider doing," or "If you do this, then you'll get that result." The action-oriented listener does not mean any harm when they offer advice in exchange for information they've acquired. It's just that's how they listen for information. They feel like they're making a contribution when they can help solve a problem. Some examples of professionals who typically use an action-oriented listening style include first responders, project managers, technical support. Action-oriented listening can also occur in everyday life. So if you know someone who you share information with and you just want them to listen, and in response to what you said, they say something like, well, what you should have done was, or did you try doing this? Or they tell you specifically what to do as a result of hearing what you said. They probably have an action-oriented listening style. The third type of listener is called a content-oriented listener. Content-oriented listeners are different from action-oriented listeners because content-oriented listeners like a lot of detail to analyze the information they are acquiring so that they can make an informed judgment in response to what they've heard. Remember, action-oriented listeners are giving you solutions. They're solving your problem as soon as they hear the information you shared. Content-oriented listeners, on the other hand, they will ask a lot of questions. They will analyze the information they've acquired before they make any type of judgment or come to any type of conclusion. You'll know a content-oriented listener because they will ask questions like, who told you that? Well, how do they know? Do you think it works the same way for everybody, or is there a chance it could work out different for you? While it can feel like the content-oriented listener is interrogating someone, they really are not. Their listening goal is to get as much detailed information, analyze the detailed information, and make a judgment or decision based on all of the details they've gathered. These are some professionals who may use a content-oriented listener style. Researchers, judges, and financial analysts. There are also people who have a dominant content-oriented listener style in everyday life, in everyday conversation. When they ask question after question and they're not being nosy, then it's probable that they have what's called a content-oriented listener style because they like to gather as much information as they can before making a judgment about what they've heard. The fourth and final type of listener style we will talk about in this conversation is called time-oriented listening. Time-oriented listeners view time as a valuable commodity. They are disappointed when somebody is not on time or is tardy. They may say something to you like, I only have 5 minutes. They want you to get to the point. Time-oriented listeners are different from action-oriented listeners. Oftentimes, those two are confused. But time-oriented listeners are different from action-oriented listeners because time-oriented listeners want concise, thorough information. They're preoccupied with deadlines and timelines. Action-oriented listeners, on the other hand, are preoccupied with acquiring information so that they can take steps and implement immediate action. That's the difference in the two. Time-oriented listeners may come across as impatient or short-tempered. However, they view time as a valuable commodity and they would prefer for the speaker to get to the point. Some professions that use a time-oriented listening style include surgeons in emergency rooms. They need as much thorough information in as little amount of time as possible so that they can make the best decision about how to help somebody in an emergency situation. Also, musicians. Musicians like to keep time. Timing is important for musicians. And CEOs. CEOs have many obligations and commitments, and they need as much thorough information in as short a time as possible. But there are also people in their everyday life who use a time-oriented listener style. You can tell when you are communicating with someone who has a time-oriented listener style because they are easily annoyed by tardiness. They are always on time. Managing their time is an important priority for them. They may ask questions like, how long will this take? Because time is an important commodity to them. Those are the 4 types of listener styles. Did you hear one that sounds a lot like the type of listener you are? Let me be clear. There are instances where everyone uses one of these 4 types of listener styles in certain situations. Yes, there are certain situations that can require you to use all 4 listener styles, but everyone has a dominant type of listener style. And these 4 listener styles, just to review, are number 1, people-oriented. People-oriented listeners are committed to nurturing relationships, and they are attentive to how people are feeling. The second is action-oriented. These listeners are acquiring information so that they can take immediate action, implement steps, solve problems. The third type of listening style is content-oriented. These people like details. They may ask a lot of questions, but they're gathering as much information as they can to make an informed judgment. And the fourth type of listener is called time-oriented listener. Time is a number 1 priority for them. Punctuality, being respectful of their time, and providing as much information as possible in a short amount of time are important to them. Knowing these 4 types of listener styles can help to enhance the way you interact with people when you are having a conversation with someone who may have a different type of listener style from you. Would you like to know what to do in situations when someone is exhibiting a listening style that is not consistent with the type of information you're sharing? If so, leave a comment that says, how do I deal with different types of listener styles? I'll make a follow-up video with tips and techniques for communicating across different listener styles. For now, thank you very much for joining me in this conversation. As always, do something today to help make your greatest ambition your greatest accomplishment. I'll see you in the next video.